All right. So I'd like to have a conversation about how men healing their feminine polarity, the inner feminine polarity within themselves, impacts the way they have sexual experiences with women. And this video is inspired by a post that I did earlier today. It was a simple sentence stating, "Men, you can only fuck a woman as deeply as you can hold her." And a man posted the question, well, that's great and poetic, but what does that actually mean? So in this video, what I'd like to do is to speak a bit about what that means as it applies to the relationship with the inner masculine and feminine polarity that exists in each person, regardless of physical gender, and how that impacts the way we not only experience our relationships, but how we experience sex. So before I even go into what that statement of men, how you can only fuck a woman as deeply as you can hold her, I want to speak to the greater context of what is going on within the context of the masculine and feminine polarities that exist within the world as a whole. So masculine and feminine polarity are not just an idea. Also, masculine does not mean the physically gendered male, and feminine does not mean the physically gendered female. Masculine and feminine principles are two aspects of a whole. For example, if we look at it at an atomic level, there are positively charged electrons, negatively charged electrons. I believe those are the terms. And together they come together, they ionize, and they create a new atom. So similarly, there are masculine and feminine polarities, masculine and feminine principles that exist within each of us that have the capacity to come up together in their exalted form. And by exalted form, I mean their purest sense of the word. When they're free of distortion, when they're free of adulteration of any sort, they can come together and create brilliance, splendor, heaven on earth, the most actualized version of who we are and how we experience relationship and connection in this life. The challenge is that for greater context, for the last decades and centuries, there has been a distortion in the masculine polarity, which has attempted to and has suppressed the feminine. Now, this is symbolic, and it shows up a lot of ways. One of the ways that this can show up is the way that we see, during the times of the witch burnings, that women were persecuted for their feminine power, for their intuitive magical abilities, and they were burned at the stake. They were drowned. Another symbolic and metaphorical way of showing how the masculine has suppressed the feminine over the decades and centuries is looking at the current state of Mother Earth, of our planet. We are commoditizing her natural resources and raping and pillaging her earth for profit without awareness or attunement to the impact on her. Now, I know that I'm generalizing now, and this isn't necessarily you who are doing this, but it's an awareness for the greater context of how the wounding and the repression and the disowning of the feminine and the consequent distortion of the masculine, because if the feminine is suppressed, the masculine cannot be in its healthy expression. Another way that this shows up that is directly applicable to men is the conditioning in culture that says men aren't meant to cry. Men aren't meant to be sensitive. Men shouldn't be vulnerable. A man is unmanly if he has feelings. So what we witness and what I see a lot in the work that I do with men and with couples is a intense disconnection of the man from his sensitivity and from his emotional experience, and an intense judgment of any emotion or vulnerability or sensitivity in him that could be perceived as weakness, and as a result be deemed unattractive or unworthy or unmasculine or unmanly. And there's a lot of wounding that exists as a result of this, because when men are disconnected from when you are disconnected from your emotions and from your sensitivity as a man, not only does it mean that there's an immense amount of suffering that's likely going on within you, but there's also an immense amount of disconnection that is likely happening between you and women. When I speak with women, being a woman, for women who are sexually, romantically, intimately attracted to men, one of the most common challenges that I hear is a man's inability to attune to her sensitivity, to feel what is going on within her, to notice the subtle changes in her breath and in her feelings and in her desire, often when this goes on in a sexual experience. And the challenge here, and we'll start weaving it back to how men only fuck a woman as deeply as you can hold her, is that there's an immense amount of wounding that has happened in sexuality because we have been taught to pursue high sensation, peak intense experiences, and the deep fucking climax that we see in porn. Um, but it's at the expense of emotional attunement and connection. And what often winds up happening is, like, so many of us know that sexuality is such a vulnerable and sensitive topic because you're likely never going to meet a human being who hasn't had some form of a negative sexual experience where they feel like they wound up doing something that they didn't want to do, in retrospect, or the person wasn't really paying attention to them, and there was some sort of harm that was caused, or there was some, for women, it's, the shame of going farther than we necessarily wanted to go within our bodies, but because of a variety of reasons, because of the fear that if we as women don't make ourselves sexually available to men, that men will not be interested in us. There's this collective narrative, which has been backed by experience for a lot of women, that one of the really only safe channels that men are really willing to lean into intimacy with women is in the context of sexual intimacy, which makes sense because men are considered manly when there's sexual prowess. When a man is getting laid, that's notches in the belt. And when you as men are conditioned to believe that to be sensitive or to be emotionally vulnerable is to display weakness, which is unattractive and potentially even threatening to your life, because perhaps you'd be bullied, perhaps you'd be persecuted or attacked by other men, perhaps you'd be judged by women for being too sensitive. Uh, Sexuality can seem like a safer place to lean into intimacy with a woman than emotional intimacy, because there's less training for men on how to navigate that emotional intimacy. So I want to start off this conversation by really inviting all of us to remove shame and self-judgment from the challenge that we are all experiencing regardless of gender, and showing up embodied, attuned, connected, and receptive in our sexual experiences, that this is a collective issue. And what I'm pointing to and what I want to invite is that sex is so much more than what we've been taught to believe that it is. We have been shown that sex is, a purely physical act that, is supposed to look a certain way, that, for heteronormative standards, which means, the dynamic between a man and a woman maybe there's a little bit of foreplay and the man inserts his penis inside of the woman's vagina and the sex goes on until the man comes and then it's over. And that's just what it is. And it can be pleasurable, it can be sensational. But what I want to invite is a deeper awareness of what is actually going on an archetypal and energetic level when we are having sex, especially when it is the dynamic between a man and a woman, and when the masculine and feminine polarities of giving and receiving, of projecting into someone or receiving someone's projected energy or physicality, is that it is an incarnate representation, meaning it's a physical representation of what is going on in the collective between the masculine and feminine polarities of existence. So I'll take it into the context of the way that I practice sexuality. To me, when I engage in a sexual experience with anyone, and I primarily identify as heterosexual, so for the most part, the people that I'm engaging with sexually I identify as a man or a male-bodied. And when I come into my sexual experiences, one of the most important things that I am prioritizing is connection to my body, connection to the felt sense of when I'm contracting, like when I'm shutting down or when I'm noticing that I'm closing off, versus when I'm noticing that I'm opening, when I notice that I'm like relaxing and opening and deepening into the experience. Because ideally, that's the only way that I desire to engage in a sexual experience, when I am present and feeling safe and open and connected, and that my pussy, my vulva, my yoni is responding by opening and yes, and it usually is reflected in the wetness that my body is exuding. And the reason that this is so important to me, and that I never bypass when I'm contracting, like when I'm shutting down or when I'm popping out of my body, is because if I do that, if I choose to not listen to my body and allow myself to be penetrated, even though there's a part of me that's checking out or disembodying or not being fully present, in a way, what I am saying yes to is the energetic and collective experience of being penetrated or enveloped without consent. Just letting that sink in for a moment. So I live my life in such a way that everything I do, every intention and every way that I engage is reflective of kind of what I'm putting my vote towards in terms of how I want to experience this world. So if I have a desire to live in a society where men and women and all genders have a deep respect and care for each other's humanity and experience, and that we would never push past or manipulate or coerce for anything more than what a person wanted to give, because our desire for people to feel cared for as humans before objects of gratification for our own pleasure is just the primary thing. And it's important to remove the conditioning that it's only men who, can objectify women for sexual pleasure. I have totally objectified men for my own sexual gratification. I have deprioritized, attunement and really feeling into the intimate, tuned in connection with this person, making it more important than my getting off. So I am guilty of that. And there are subtler and subtler and subtler ways that energetic blueprint of sacrificing a connection and attunement because of agenda continue to play out in my life and in all our lives. So the practice is becoming deeply aware of any place where our own hunger for satiation or pleasure or fulfillment in some way overrides our desire for attunement and resonant connection in every moment. And how we're conditioned in terms of our physical gender in the world. Um, like, for example, men, let me tune in for a moment. So each gender, men and women, and on one level, gender doesn't even exist, but we're not going to go into that, at least not physical gender. We're not going to go into that right now. But based upon the conditionings of those who are born into a male presenting body and the conditioning of those who were born into a female presenting body, there are different wounds and narratives and conditionings that can put each gender at a disadvantage if we aren't doing the conscious and intentional work at really looking at where we're playing into those narratives. Like, for example, the narrative for men is, I'm not supposed to be emotional, I'm not supposed to be sensitive, I'm not supposed to be vulnerable. For women, the narrative might be, well, men only value me for my sex. So if I'm not, physically attractive, and if I'm not, having sex with this person and doing more than I might necessarily want to do, I won't be loved by a man. So these are examples of conditionings in each gender that can impact how we show up in relationship with the opposite sex. So here's the thing. We are each responsible for our own healing and integration of our healthy masculine and feminine polarities. So men, when I am talking to you about, so pausing here, we're all responsible for the healing of our own masculine and feminine polarities. So that's the sovereignty piece, where we're not reliant upon, one thing that can show up for women, for example, is when we as women do not have a healthy relationship with our masculine polarity. Often what will happen is that we rely upon the men in our life to play the only role of creating safety for us, as opposed to us as women utilizing the healthy relationship with our inner masculine polarity as the inner protector, as the inner one who listens to the body and advocates via the felt sense yes and no for when we need to slow down, or when we're not feeling safe, or when we need to have a conversation. It's the woman's healthy integration of the inner masculine polarity that is actually what allows for us to create safety within our own bodies. So when we go into intimate and erotic experiences with men, regardless of how attuned the man is to his own intuition and inner feminine and the health of his inner masculine, we're not purely reliant upon that man's perfect integration of his masculine and feminine polarity in order for us to feel safe. So that's women's work. And for those of you who are women, the upcoming women's embodiment container that's going to be opening for enrollment in October, which is called Sovereignty. I'll post a link to join the waitlist in the comments below. That course, that container, is specifically about healing our inner masculine polarity and reintegrating a healthy relationship with our feminine polarity so that we're able to create a sense of safety and security within our bodies and be able to access that intuitive wisdom within us and express it into the world without fearing that our external world can break us. It's about creating that inner resiliency, that inner union of the masculine and feminine within that allows for us to be clear channels of not just our own intuitive wisdom, but spiritual wisdom, and channeling that information, that wisdom, that felt sense into our relationships, especially with men, because it's so deeply needed. So here's the other piece. We need each other in order to create this healing. Meaning, we women cannot heal ourselves fully without the help of men. And similarly, men cannot heal this, this divide between men and women, and divide between the masculine and the feminine, without connection from women. There is this sacred union and interdependency that exists between all genders, and in this context between men and women, that is needed so that we can actually release these false stories of the opposite sex not being safe, because that's a lot of what men and women are carrying around right now. That men are saying it's not safe to trust women. Women are saying it's not safe to trust men, but we're still leaning in with this desire to connect and experience nourishment. But there are still these old wounded parts of us that are carrying around these stories that prevent us from being really able to experience healthy synergistic connection. So, tying it all around, when I say to men, only fuck a woman as deeply as you can hold her, what I'm inviting is to penetrate a woman intensely with masculine energy that is not connected to your inner feminine, which is the part in you that can feel the woman that you are fucking, which is the one in you that is attuned and sensitive to the experience of the woman that you are fucking. Often what can happen is that if we're not in connection with that inner feminine part of us, there's a way that we become disconnected from the heart. And ideally, the heart and the sex are connected. This is how we bring healing into our sexual experiences. So when we as men, when you as men are not connected to the inner feminine polarity, and you're fucking a woman, that often means that you're not connected to your heart when you're fucking her. And that makes it easier to not feel when perhaps fear is coming up for her. When you're not connected to your inner feminine, it means that you're not going to be as connected to, is she okay? Is she in her body? Is she desiring this? Is she enjoying this? Should I slow down? Like, should we slow down and hold each other? Because when you move into a deep fucking experience with a woman, often what is needed afterwards is some deep holding. Because when you're penetrating her with your cock, you're also penetrating her with masculine consciousness. And there's a lot of wounding that exists right now in the collective around the masculine polarity and the feminine polarity, of the feminine being violated without its consent. And again, this doesn't mean that this is solely your responsibility. Yes, the work of women is really being connected to our bodies and advocating for what we want, need, and feel in the moment, so that we're not saying yes to something that our body's actually a no to, and that we might regret moving down the road. And we need you, men. We need you as a part of our healing process, because so much of the wounding that has occurred towards women has happened at the hands of men. And this does not mean that you need to feel shame or guilt or go into a self-rejection spiral, but it's a realization that there's been an immense amount of wounding that has led up to this point where we are engaging in our sexual experiences, and likely each one of us is bringing some type of wounding with the opposite sex. And again, I'm speaking specifically to heterosexual coupling. I know that there's a wide spectrum of sexual orientations and dynamics, but likely when a man and woman come together, the man is carrying some wounding around his relationship to his masculinity, to his relationship to his femininity, to his relationship to his sexuality, and to his relationship with women. And the same is true for the woman entering into the experience. And when two people, in this case, I'm speaking to men, when a man prioritizes the healing of his own inner feminine, not only is he experiencing the gold and riches of gaining access to his emotions, to his vulnerability, to giving himself permission to feel and be sensitive and access his heart, which in itself is worth it. But what he's also doing when he's healing his feminine energy is he's exponentially increasing his capacity to connect with women and to care for women and to be a man who is choosing to offer a different blueprint of what is possible in terms of how men are able to feel and care for the experience of women. Because there are a lot of women who are walking around feeling that it's not safe to open our bodies to men, to open our legs and allow a man inside one of the most vulnerable parts of us. And yes, we are responsible for choosing when and when we do not open our legs. And there is something in us as women that are so deeply longing to soften to you men, to feel like our vigilance centers can go offline and we can fully surrender and let go to you because you are connected and attuned to us. That we don't need to worry that when your beast comes online, when your intense penetrator comes online, that it means you're going to disconnect from your heart. We want your penetrator to come online. We want the one who fucks in you to come online. And I also understand that there's, for the men who are doing their work and want to be an ally to women, I understand that you don't want to be that guy. You don't want to be the perpetrator. You don't want to cause harm. You want to fuck. You want to have your desire fully on, and you don't want to cause harm. How you address that is healing your relationship with your inner feminine polarity. Through healing the part of you that has repressed your sensitivity and your vulnerability and your emotionality because you've been told that it makes you unmanly. But the secret here is that through doing that integration work, through doing that healing work, you actually gain access to an ability to connect your heart and your cock in a way where you can fully let go because your heart, your emotionality, your attunement, and your sensitivity is online. And that you can actually trust yourself to let go as well because you trust yourself to stay connected to your body and to her body as you let go into that primal fucking that all of us want. We want to surrender to you. We want to feel you. And this is an offering, a taste of what the path for that might be. If you're a man who's wanting to work with that, this is a way that I work with men. And I also have a couple of references for men who are doing this work. And I really do recommend men working with men in this. If you are a man who's curious about this, you're welcome to private message me and I can send you a recommendation of a couple of men who might be good to work with on this. And again, for women who are interested in our work in this, the healing and integration of our inner masculine and feminine polarity, creating safety within our bodies and staying present and embodied as we speak truth in our sex, in our lives, and in our intimate relationships. My upcoming 8-week embodiment container for women called Sovereignty opens for enrollment in early October. And I will post a link to sign up for the waitlist in the comments below. Thank you for your presence. Thank you for your embodiment. Thank you for your receptivity. It is a pleasure to be here with you in this moment and always. Take care of your hearts and the hearts of others. And I'll talk to you soon.